and welcome to a three-part series where I talk about reading goals. This first one is going to be all about how to make reading goals that work for you and that you can actually accomplish by the end of the year without getting sick and tired of them or burning yourself out. So I love reading goals, and I often find that the most fun part about reading goals and goals in general is planning for them. It's so fun to think about all the aspirations we have for ourselves in various areas of our life, but it can be really tough to actually follow through on those, especially when we don't make our goals in the correct way. So we're going to be going through some tips and tricks that I've learned both for reading goals and also just goals in general, and how I apply them to my reading goals to make them really successful. So the first tip I have for you is to be specific. I often hear the goal, I want to read more classics. I want to read more fantasy. I want to listen to more audiobooks. And those are all great goals, but I would say that more is so subjective that it doesn't actually give you much to shoot for. So if you're saying that you've read 50 books the previous year and you just want to read more than 50, you don't really care where it is, I think that would be okay. But what I think is an even better way to structure the goal is to give yourself an actual number that you're shooting for. So my favorite way to make these number goals when we're talking about specifically like how much we want to read or a certain type of genre that we want to read is to start from where I naturally start. So if I read 1 or 2 classics a year, if I suddenly say I want to read 12 classics this year, that's probably not going to work. So what I would do is I would look at how many classics I've read in previous years. If you can, think about the past few years and see where your average kind of lays, and then maybe bump it up by 1 or 2. I wouldn't suggest picking out the classics that you want to read, but just make the number specific. You don't have to pick out the specific books necessarily, because you might not be in the mood for them in 10 months when you're in October and you're trying to finish up some of these goals. So I would just say make it specific, give yourself a number, but don't go so specific as to pick out every book that you're going to read for this. And remember, when you're making your number goal, that reading time has to come from somewhere else. So if I normally read 2 classics and I want to push myself to read 5 classics, then that reading time has to come from reading other things like fantasy or mystery or romance. So take that into account when you're thinking about your whole reading year. That's one of the reasons I wouldn't jump it up from 2 classics to 20 classics, because I'm going to be missing out on all the other reading I naturally am drawn towards. So be specific and make sure that you know exactly what it is you're aiming for. Using a word like more can sometimes be less motivating than a number, because you can automatically see how close you are if I've read 1 out of 5 classics or 2 out of 5 classics or 20 out of 100 fantasy books. Using a specific number can help us really see concretely our progress, and it's motivating to try to make that number happen. So the second tip is to start where you are. Really take stock of your natural reading. When you're not pushing yourself, what type of books are you gravitating towards? What page length are they? What's their pacing level? Do you prefer audiobooks? Do you like different genres of audiobook? Because I don't listen to every genre in audio form. I could only listen to certain genres. So really think about what your natural habitat is for reading. What do you gravitate towards? What's on your shelves and readily accessible? What do you have on your Kindle? What's your library situation like? What books are you really excited about right now? And just think about those habits to give you a starting place to build your goals. So I tend to read a lot of fantasy. So when I'm building my TBR goals or reading goals, I really want to kind of build off of this. Fantasy will be a large portion of what I read throughout the year. Sometimes 50-60% of what I read will be fantasy. So I want to make sure that my goals aren't read, 20 mysteries, read 20 classics, read this big long romance series. Like, I can have maybe one of those goals, but if I'm going to read primarily fantasy, I probably want my goals to be related to fantasy. The third tip I have for you is to be realistic. When you're building out your goals, try to count up how many books it will actually take for you to complete those goals. So, for example, this past year, I had counted up as I was making my goals to see how many things I wanted to read. So it was like 10 books in detective series, 12 classics, 30 new to me authors, mass market paperback fantasies. I had like 12 of those. So I had to actually go and count and say, okay, how many books am I signing myself up for? Because I know how much I can read in a year. And if I set my goal and it takes 150 books to complete all the goals, I'm setting myself up for failure. So I would suggest when you're doing it, one, I highly suggest allowing yourself to double up. So if a book works for multiple goals, definitely count it for multiple goals, because that can help kind of streamline your reading that way. And then two, really figure out how much am I actually going to read for these goals. If you're pushing yourself and your goals are things that are outside of your comfort zone, I would suggest bringing those numbers down quite a bit so that you have a lot of time during your normal reading times to read those comfort zone books. Because you don't want to have it happen where you're avoiding your goals because they're uncomfortable or they're in genres you're not sure about. So if I was going to push myself to read literary fiction, which is something I dip in and out of, if I read roughly 100 full-length novels a year, I probably only want like 8 to 12 of those to be literary fiction, because the majority of what I want to read is going to be what I naturally read. So this is all kind of working together of using that starting place. And if my goals are going to stretch me, I need to make sure I'm not trying to stretch myself so far that I'll snap. And then think about, do I actually want to dedicate that much of my reading to this thing that year? So if I say I want to read 20 nonfiction books, do I actually want to dedicate 20 books of my reading this year to nonfiction? Maybe I do, or maybe that number is a little high. The fourth thing that I want you to keep in mind is to be kind to yourself. Goals should not be meant to punish us. Give yourself some easy goals that are going to boost your motivation throughout the year. So one of the easier goals I gave myself last year was finding a new favorite detective series. Reading mystery books is something I really enjoy a lot and I pick up pretty naturally, and I particularly like exploring mystery series following some sort of detective or something or other. So I gave myself that goal, but instead of giving myself like 30 books that I wanted to check out, I just gave myself 10. I knew I was going to beat this number if I focused on it at all. And I gave it to myself, and I met it pretty early on in the year. I want to say I met this goal in like May or June, and I felt great about that. I didn't feel like I needed to push myself any further in this area. So don't try to revolutionize your reading in like 1 year. Take your time. Stretch a little bit. Don't try to stretch yourself in 20 directions. Give yourself some slow pitches that you can hit easily throughout the year to kind of keep it moving. Because if I don't complete any of my goals until like December, I might lose momentum. But finishing this one mid-year gave me that boost to be like, look at me go, I'm doing great. And then my fifth and final tip is probably the biggest one, and that's to make it fun. Last year, I created a whole game around my reading goals where as I made progress on these goals, I earned points that then are going to, at the end of the year, allow me to go shopping for different prizes. I made myself a prize board, and it says what the different prizes are and how much points they're worth. So at the end of the year, I get to look through all my goals, I get to gain points, and I've been watching my progress grow and watching the amount of points I have grow throughout the year, and then I'm gonna get a chance to go shopping for all these prizes. I also made it a little more fun by having like a physical checklist. I could check things off when I completed them and see my progress throughout the year. I could look back and go, oh my gosh, yeah, I read that this year. That was cool. And I had that for all of my goals that were like numerical goals. I had a separate page for them. And then on the back, I did some tracking of the goals that were less checklisty, and I just needed to keep track of like if I had completed it or not. So having a checklist just made it fun. I got a little dopamine rush every time I got to like check it off and then write which book I had read for that goal. And I thought it was a really fun way to help make it a little more fun, keep the goals fresh in my mind, because I was always excited to go back and look at the checklist and see what kind of progress I'd been making. And then I also made it fun by picking goals that excited me. So when I sat and thought about the year, I really tried to think about what am I wanting to read next year? Instead of having my goals steer me in a bunch of directions, let's really lean into that. So one of my main goals for this year was to read books physically, that I physically own, and really shrink down my TBR. So a lot of the goals that I had fit really well with the books that I already had on my shelves. So even though I might be like reading for other specific goals, it was working towards getting down my TBR, and seeing this progress was really fun throughout the year as my shelves kind of changed and I refreshed things, got rid of books that have been hanging on for a long time. And it just made it fun because I was really excited about the whole project altogether. And the goals were like little individual pieces of that larger goal. So those are all the tips that I have for you. I would love to know if you like making goals for your reading, or if you prefer just to let reading be like a fun thing that you do and you don't have goals at all. I find making and following goals really fun. I like stretching myself in that way and setting like goals for me that stretch my reading just a little bit, but in ways that I want to stretch it. So I'd love to know if you have any ideas for your goals for 2026 or whatever year you might be watching this. And I hope that you will like and subscribe, because I am going to be having at least 2 more goal videos. I need to wrap up my goals for 2025, and you'll get to see me add up all my points and go shopping for prizes, which will be really fun. And then I will also be making a 2026 reading goals video, and I have the most amazing, intricate game system yet for my goals that combine together with a brand new TBR game I'm making, and it's going to be so much fun. I've been working on it for months. So if that sounds at all interesting and you like being nerdy about goals and points and gamifying your reading, definitely stick around and subscribe so you don't miss the videos. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye.